Welcome to this second session of our conference about populism and digital polarization, the politics of online hate. I've got with me today Dr. Ibrahim Kurt from Society of European Scholars and Professor Stefan Biel from Catholic University of Leuven and University of Exeter. And I've got Sahil Lohia from Jamia Hamdard University in India, and Francesca Cassano from University of Milan. Our first speaker is Dr. Kurt.
Thank you for being here. Today I'm going to talk about a phenomenon that is reshaping our democracies. The dangerous merger of populist politics, digital platforms, and the legitimization of hate. I have some followings you can also follow, and also I'm going to talk about some practical things, but other points you can find in the article, in the book. Across the globe, we are witnessing a dramatic rise in populist politics, but this isn't just a shift in policy preferences. It's something more profound. It is a new form of communication warfare. Digital platforms have become the primary battlefield, and in this war, hate speech is being systematically normalized. It's moving from the fringe to the mainstream. So our key question today is, how does digital populism accomplish this? How does it turn hate into a seemingly acceptable part of our political discourse? To answer this, it is necessary to conduct a focused investigation. It was performed a comparative discourse analysis of three archetypal populist leaders: Donald Trump in the US, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, and Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey. It was systematically studied their political speeches, their social media campaigns, and how they justified policies. The goal was to look past the noise and identify the shared linguistic patterns they used to make hate seem legitimate. The research is necessary to conduct a focused investigation. It was a performed comparative discourse analysis for three leaders. And the heart of this strategy is a simple but powerful formula: us versus them. Populism frames society as a moral battle between the pure people and the corrupt elite. But this binary doesn't stop there. It constantly expands to include new enemies. Immigrants are framed as invaders. Journalists become enemies of the people. Minorities are portrayed as a cultural threats. And political opponents are labeled traitors. This framework creates a moral justification for exclusion. It's no longer about debate. It's about defending the tribe. Under Jair Bolsonaro, similar dynamics developed in Brazil, where journalists, environmental campaigners, and minorities were portrayed as dangerous to national sovereignty or traditional values. President Erdogan's political vision is centered on creating a new Turkey that breaks with Western influences to restore the nation's historical and Islamic greatness. He leverages populistic rhetoric, drawing a clear line between the poor people and corrupt elites, or external enemies whom he accuses of conspiracies against Turkey. This strategy was intensive after the 2016 coup attempt, which he used to justify a widespread purge and centralized power. In essence, the Gulen movement is the concrete embodiment of the terrorists and external enemy mentioned in the summary. The 2016 coup attempt was the pivotal event that allowed Erdogan to move from general populist rhetoric to a specific large-scale action, the purge against in this defined enemy, centralizing his power in the process. However, this rhetoric and strategy have profoundly polarized Turkey and Turkish society, marginalizing secularists, Kurds, and political opponents. While it strengthens his core support, it poses significant long-term risks to the country's unity. President Trump's political strategy is built on the foundation of polarizing rhetoric that deliberately divides society into a binary of us versus them. It is built on a sharp us versus them division. He rallies real Americans against enemies. He defines liberals, immigrants, and political elites using hyperbolic threats and fear. He creates constant crisis. He alone is the strong leader who can protect and restore greatness. Make America great again. The polarizing rhetoric solidifies his base but deeply divides the nation, fueling distrust and social conflict. We have mechanisms. The first mechanism is stigmatization. This is the process of creating the dangerous other. In analysis, it was found consistent use of dehumanizing metaphors, calling people viruses, investigations, or animals. We saw criminalizing labels like terrorist and traitor applied broadly to entire groups. For example, Trump's president use of invasion to describe immigrants isn't just a policy term. It is a dehumanizing metaphor, but implies war and justifies extreme measures. Similarly, Erdogan's branding of all dissenters as terror sympathizers criminalizes political oppositions. The effect is that prejudice is transformed from a vice into a patriotic duty. The second one is emotional warfare. Populists don't appeal the reasons, they bypass it. They target raw emotions, the fear of cultural replacement, the anger at a corrupt system, and the resentment towards those perceived as privileged. This language is perfectly tailored for the digital age. Why? Because emotion drives engagement, engagement drives algorithmic amplification. So what gets rewarded online? Outrage. Angry people. The result is a sinister reframing. Hate speech is no longer seen as abuse, but as brave truth-telling against the censorship of political correctness. And the third one is mechanism, digital amplification, which brings the next step to our third mechanism, digital amplification. Platforms aren't neutral conducts. Their very design accelerates this process. It operates in an attention economy. Algorithms are optimized for one thing, engagement. And what drives engagement? Outrage, fear, and simplicity. Complex, nuanced truth loses. Simple, hateful narratives win. This creates a vicious cycle. Hateful content sparks high engagement, which the algorithm boosts, leading to even more hateful content. Users get trapped into echo chambers in that circle. All the time they can see the same speeches, same rhetoric sentences. Their beliefs are constantly reinforced and counter-evidence never reaches them. And The human cost. So what is the human cost of this digital populist engine? The analysis points to four devastating outcomes. First one is eroded trust in institutions, the media, and ultimately in each other. Second, deep polarization, where us versus them becomes a permanent state of being. Third, symbolic violence, language that doesn't just describe conflict, but actively justifies real-world violence. The fourth one, and ultimately, democratic decline, the slow erosion of norms and rights that hold our societies together. This isn't just about words, it's about the very fabric of our society unraveling. Let's look at the evidence from our three cases. The patterns are striking. From Trump, we have the relentless delegitimization of the media as fake news and the dehumanization of immigrants as part of an invasion. From Bolsonaro, we see attack on academics as cultural Marxists and the division of world in the patriots versus traitors. From Erdogan, we see the criminalization of dissent through labels like terror sympathizers and the silencing of opposition in the name of the national weal. Across all three, we see the same pattern. Language is used not to communicate, but to create moral hierarchies and justify exclusion. Confronting this problem leads us to a familiar but profound dilemma: free speech versus human dignity. Populists expertly exploit this tension. They pose as brave defenders of free speech, while using that same speech to attack and marginalize vulnerable groups. We are often presented with a false choice: total freedom, which allows hate to spread unchecked, or total control, which leads to authoritarian censorship. We must reject this binary. We need a third way. The third way is a comprehensive three-part defense. First, smart regulation. We need laws based on protecting human dignity, not just punishing speech. This means transparency requirements for platforms are real accountability, like the EU's Digital Services Act. Second, technical responsibility. Platforms must be forced to open their algorithmic black boxes, adopt ethical AI design, and actively invest in counter-speech initiatives. And the third, and most importantly, civic empowerment. We must invest massively in media, literally education, teaching critical thinking skills, and creating programs for dialogue across the group lines. No single solution is enough. It has to be all three working together. So, what do we do? Now, we are urgent next steps for all sectors of society. Governments need to pass and enforce robust digital regulations. Platforms must be transparent and accountable. Civil society must create spaces for dialogue across ideological divides. And we in academia must continue this interdisciplinary work and develop early warning systems. This is an all-hands-on-desk moment. So I'm finishing, and I had the last slide. So bring it all together, our key takeaway is this: digital populism is not just noisy politics. It is a systematic form of communication warfare that uses stigmatization, emotional manipulation, and digital amplification its primary weapons. The cost is nothing less than our social cohesion and democratic integrity. But the solution, while difficult, is within our grasp. It requires a united front of law, technology, and education. The fight we are in isn't just against the hate speech. It is a fight for a communication culture based on human dignity, empathy, and shared truth. It is difficult to build but easy to destroy. It may be a long road for humanity, but we are building human dignity, empathy, and shared truth, and we will. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kurt. Our next speaker is Professor Stefan Beal.
Okay, well, thank you very much for attending, and thanks to the organizers for setting up this event. I'm going to present you a work in progress, which is actually in its early days. So bear that in mind. My apologies, it's not a finished product, but I came here mostly to present work in progress, to get comments at the lunchtime, for example, any suggestions of where we can bring this, or what kind of interest there might be in pushing the research in this or that direction. Basically what the starting point for this research was were the three key, in a way, aspects that we see when we are attuning to recent cases of political violence. And these three aspects are, on the first hand, younger and younger demographics of offenders. So, for example, we have now a majority of minors in the French system of radicalization surveillance. So younger and younger people. We have a rise in lone offenders compared to people who commit political violence or plot political violence as part of a group. So here you have the PIRUS data set of radicalization in the United States, and we can clearly see a rise of people acting individually as opposed to part of an organized movement. And then the rise of what Gartenstein, Ross, and colleagues call composite violent extremism. That is offenders that have some ideological profiles that are not as clear-cut as, let's say, someone who is acting on behalf of the Islamic State. But we have people who mix different sorts and forms of ideologies to different extents and in different ways, or have an ideological profile which is not very clear, right? You try to connect that to an ideology, but it's very hard to connect neatly to one of the known big ideologies. So these are three key trends, and we're wondering where this is coming from. And then the more you dig into these cases of young, alone, and ideologically unclear cases, which are more and more numerous, the more you dig into these, the more you start to see a pattern. And the pattern is that of individuals who are actually fascinated firsthand by violence itself and not by a particular political ideology. Now, they turn to ideology afterwards, but they have a keen interest in violence and extreme violence per se, which is why some authors and practitioners talk about violence-fixated individuals, and then they apply some kind of ideological gloss, which is incoherent typically, on their violent fantasies. We talked about Alex Rudakbana first, the Southport killer. We talked about him in the first session. What's interesting is that people have focused on some of his online content being online content related to some ideologies. He had, for example, an Al-Qaeda manual downloaded, but he was actually the biggest thing in his online footprint was access to websites that host extreme violent videos and the very last thing he did before stabbing the little girls in the birthday party was to watch the video of a fatal stabbing that took place in Australia. And so he was addict to this kind of extremely violent content, and we can say this is the same of many cases where when you analyze the digital footprint, and people typically look at ideological content, well, in between the ideological content of various sorts, typically unclear or composite, you see multiple accesses to these these Gore websites. Same with Ethan Miller in the United States, and then a case I worked on, which was a case that you would take at face value. When you look at the digital footprint, there was a lot of neo-Nazi stuff, so it was a very clear ideological footprint, and so the prosecution went on for a terrorism charge based on neo-Nazi ideology. But actually, the more you looked into his digital footprint, the more you saw here, this is a piece from my report, really a lot of visits to bestgore.com, which was at the time the main website for Gore videos. And he was searching for things like cartel torture or tortured alive, blonde girl, severe pounding, man gets beaten, and so on, ripping out girls' organs. So you start to see really this fascination for violence. And this is in many, many, many cases, actually, even the cases that are seemingly clear-cut for terrorism with a clear ideology. Of course, there is a political response. We have seen a range of discussions on both the unclear and unstable ideology in young offenders, especially in the UK following some of the reports after the Southport stabbing, but also some timid steps towards tackling this Gore content, or as we call it, the Gore ecosystem, because it's not just one website, it's a constellation of websites, Telegram channels, forums, and the like. This is not a new issue. If we remember the infamous case of Lucas Magnota, it involved, of course, the Best Gore website already back then, and this has gone even further. And there are some very interesting regulation attempts now with the Ofcom in the UK, given the new legislation that was discussed previously. There is a growing literature, very new, on extreme Gore content. I think there was an older literature focusing on Gore content by the time of snuff movies and things like that. It went dormant, and thanks to thanks to the Islamic State's extremely Gore videos, there has been a new interest in extreme content and its relationship with political ideology and political violence and terrorism. Yeah? I list some of the reports here and some of the papers, some good work by Nathan Brooke, the team in Montreal led by Cécile Rousseau, who has a radicalization team, the equivalent of Prevent, but in Quebec. And all these really provide some very good work, insightful observations on the heavy use of this type of content and what can be done about it. And recent report at Voxpol by here Human Digital, and a blog post by Mark Peden. Now, this work is very interesting, but it's overwhelmingly qualitative with case studies and focus on one specific video or forum or case. I think what we still don't have is an account of the structure of the ecosystem, like what are the main websites, what are the connections between them, and so on and so forth. And it lacks a multi-dimensional explanation of what exactly is the link between that ecosystem of websites and Gore content and access, and in some cases addiction to extremely violent content and political violence. So we know there are some links, some of the authors have discussed that, but we need a proper theory of that and a proper conceptualization that is multidimensional and based on hard data. So our project aims to address these three shortcomings. First of all, of course, by using data science methods instead of qualitative case studies. Second, to provide a clear account of the structure of this ecosystem, like what exactly what's out there in a rigorous way. Can we see connections between the websites, flows of material, coincidences or not, users, heavy users, common users, and so on, and then offer an explicit problematization of the link between Gore and extremism and political violence. So these are the three aims of the project, and we're kind of starting to start with that with if you want, three research questions. The first one is, what exactly is the network of the Gore ecosystem. What does it look like? What, do we have like different communities or different hubs, or do we have a kind of a star-centered, you know, gravity network with a big site in the middle and then some secondary sites? Second, do we see user hierarchies? Typically, in almost any extremist online environment, or indeed any online environment, you have very strong hierarchies of users, with some of them really driving the influx of information and structuring the information. Do we see that in the Gore ecosystem, or is it like a flat system where people contribute and download? And then do we see some, in the networks, do we see some biotopes or ecological niche, as we say? So maybe some of these Gore websites specialize in terrorism content, maybe some others specialize in like rape, who knows? And so here I'm going to present some very, very preliminary content results from the study. Just to let you know what we're talking about, we have some videos, for example, video sharing platforms here, there, and there, so you start to see immediately. And then we have some forums here, like documenting reality. I'm not putting the images for a long time. So you see that we have basically two types of websites: video sharing websites and then forums. And in the forums, people contribute within threads, like within thematic threads. So you would have a thematic thread on terrorism, another one on rape, another one, etc., etc. And then people upload their videos as parts of discussions. Or you have the video, typically kind of YouTube platforms where people upload video and other comments below it. And then all these websites link to, for example, Telegram channels where the content can be shared throughout the content, and then from there to the phones of people you know, like if you have teenagers. This is kind of the content that unfortunately is getting more and more exposed to teenagers. So for the beginning, we thought we would concentrate just on 3 websites, video sharing platforms, to see if we start already to see platform, what can we learn from an initial exploration of 3 platforms. And then later on next year, so next calendar year, we're going to expand to about 30, 35 platforms to get the data from. So these, as you can see, are not small websites, even though the very big one, bestgore.com, was stopped. We have 2 kind of medium-sized platforms in this environment, and we call medium-sized platform places which have 16,000 videos, for example, 15,000 videos or more. So these are pretty hefty, big, you know, big website with a lot of content. About 1,400 users for the big ones. You immediately notice something, which is that you have a pretty good similarity between the 2 first one, and this is already a first finding. These are actually almost mirror websites, even though they have very different, seemingly different content. You can. We started to scrape the back catalog of videos and interventions. The line here is very odd because here we couldn't access the back catalog, so it looks a bit odd here. But basically what's interesting in this, so you see fluctuations in the upload of video. Here we are in 2025 already, but we go back to so it's basically the line of 2025. And you can see, you know, it's pretty regular uploading of videos and sharing of videos. What's interesting is that here you can clearly see that these are pretty much the same, yeah, Gore DB and Best Gore Fun. Yeah, this is another way to put this. It's like a smooth average. And indeed, when you look at the users, we were able to see that the uploaders are the same in the 2 websites. So what we're kind of expecting for the bigger constellations, that we are going to see not just heavy users and heavy uploaders within each of these websites, but we are actually going to see probably only a very small minority of people who are very active on all the websites, or almost all the websites, uploading the videos constantly and steering the discussions. So even though this is quite a big constellation of websites, the problem is actually caused by a very tiny minority of people. So these are video uploaders, the green ones, and then you can see that all these people have uploaded both to GoreDB and to Best Gore. Now, live Gore seems to be a different kind of niche and doing different things because mostly the people who upload there are not the same as the people who upload on the two other platforms. So we're going to do this in a much more systematic way, building these networks of users and commenters and uploaders to see the structure of users across that. Of course, in the comments, we see the typical power law sort of distribution of commenters. So these are the comments by commenter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, and how many times they have commented. And we can clearly see the typical pattern as you find in every single internet community, with a very small minority of people posting a lot and uploading a lot, and then the vast majority of people just commenting once or zero, or uploading one video and then leaving. This is the same in every single platform we've seen so far. Also in other extremist platforms, it's always the same structure, so that we see it's not surprising here. We look, and I'm going to finish with that, aware of the time, we look at a series of keywords and what kind of keywords that we see in the comments. We see that we have, of course, a lot of words related to violent death, of course, but we also have a lot of words that denote some kind of extremist ideation, especially far-right and misogynistic kind of comments. So these platforms are permeated with this kind of extremist language. You see that in usernames. Now, I'm going to skip that because I don't have the time, but it's important to see that the Gore ecosystem is not disconnected from other extremist ecosystems. We have a paper in which we theorize that, but here is, for example, a mapping of the French far-right online ecosystem with probably around 10,000 websites. And we can see that some websites typically link to other ecosystems. Yeah. So, for example, Pouvoir Mondial goes and shares a lot of paranormal and conspiracy theories stuff. Now, we can see that in some of the extremist websites that we have in other ecosystems, so typically incel ones for this, they put a lot of links towards the Gore ecosystem. So these two are heavily interconnected. In fact, when we go back to our data sets of incel content, we see that on the incel forums you have a lot of links towards the Gore online ecosystem, meaning that this produces this kind of dual extremist / fascination for violence flows of people from one extremist ecosystem to the other. I'll finish there. All ideas and suggestions are welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And our next speaker is Sahil Lohia. Sahil, yes, please.
Okay, so today I'm here to present, one of the threats that our democracies are facing worldwide. That's the pathway from, the digital hate to the real world harm. We are living in a transformation of how the hate spreads, how the violence is authorized, and how the democracy itself is undermined. And the title which I am going to present today is The Digital Hate to Real World Harm, Online Platform, the Populist Leaders' Rhetoric, and the Escalation of Hate Crime. What I'm going to share with you is now a mechanism of violence that is operating right now in the world, across the globe, mechanism that has already resulted in riots, lynching, and other human rights issues, which basically, undermines the democratic norms of our world. We are today witnessing a very unprecedented convergence where the democracy, where the digital infrastructure meets the populist rhetorics, where the historical permission structure often creates an industrial scale hate amplification machine. We have seen one of the most profound shifts we are witnessing in how hate spreads in our society. Traditionally, hate was constrained by geography and logistics. Think about it, how it used to work. We need to have people in the same room. We need to organize meeting. We need to print pamphlets, convince gatekeepers in media to amplify our messages. Hate group relies on the charismatic leaders and physical networks. This means hate has a natural friction at that time. It was very slow and very limited in reach, and it required a very sustained effort. But now the digital hate is, the digital hate has converged it in so many ways that within minutes, a single inflammatory post can reach millions across the continent, millions across the democracies instantaneously. So there is no geographical boundary anywhere. Someone in a small town can be radicalized by the content produced halfway around the world, and here we are. What makes this particularly dangerous is now the algorithmic amplification. The social media platforms, they are not the neutral carriers. Their algorithms are designed to maximize the reach. And what is the reach? Reach is outrage, fear, and anger. The most sensationalizational, emotionally charged content get prioritized because it keeps people scrolling. So hate does not just spread, it is rewarded by the infrastructure of digital media itself. Now what we are seeing is a complex political speeches which are turned down into a 30-second YouTube shorts, TikTok clips, or Instagram reels. The nuisance is very stripped away. What remains are pure emotional triggers, raise a sense of threat. These clips travels very far and very faster than any full speech can ever could. So now, hate speech, it basically acts as a precursor for a bigger crime like riots or like riots, which can even divide a nation. I come from a nation where in 1947, my country was divided on the basis of hate speech, which leads to the first, which led to the first time in the world history where one nation was divided on the basis of religion. So hate speech acts as a precursor, where the populist leader, I'm not using the word populist political leader, I'm using the word populist leader. So a populist leader can be anyone. A populist leader can be, someone from a religious background, someone from a university, or someone from any political group. So what they do, they basically, they recast their moral duty toward the citizen. Who are the citizens? Citizens are we the people. The Constitution of India starts with we the people. Now, who are the people? The people are basically the basic human beings who are living across the world. But the basic thing is those populist leader those populist leader tag we the people as we the pure people of that land. So the populism is not about the policy, it's always about the identity. So the we the people is always about the identity and the morality which is given by those populist leader. So basically this populism, it creates a very powerful fiction. So that exists, that exists to make those homogeneous people of that society as one. So they are locked into a very kind of a battle of their own existence. This is not a debate about the tax policy or a healthcare, or it is framed as a cosmic struggle between the good and the evil, and between between the survival and the extinction of that nation people. So at the sir said that it create a binary world. So it create a binary world, but I will add a term. It create a binary moral world where we the people and where we the people, either we are with the populist leader or we are against them. So we the people are either with them or against them. So there is no middle ground. So political opponents, they are not just people. They have different ideas. They become traitors. Minorities, as sir pointed out, they are not fellow citizens and all. So everything here collapses. But here is what is particularly I'm so sorry for this. Yes. So the leader, what they do, they maintain a deniability thing. So what they do, they maintain a deniability thing, whereas their followers convinced that they are heroes, they are not they are not the perpetrators. They act on the logic of the populist rhetoric that has been constructed. They genuinely believe that they are saying their countries. They genuinely see themselves as the protector of the nation, not as the aggressor. So what fuels, this digital hate is the economy of digital hate. If we connect this this populistic rhetoric with the digital infrastructure, the most crucial thing is to understand how these platform works. They are the business models. Those business models have fundamentally reshaped how these political hate speech transforms into the other ideas. These platform makes money from our attention, specifically from keeping each and everyone scrolling, watching, and engaging. And they have discovered millions of data points what keeps people glued to their screen: outrage, fear, and morally. So this algorithm, basically it is artificial intelligence. It does not care about our, it does not care about truth. It does not care about the feeling. But what it care about is the economics of the digitization. So what happened? The emotionally extreme things get rewarded. Not occasionally, but systematically. Every day, every hour, the most inflammatory content rises to the top because it generates comments, shares, reaction, and all the behavior that signals to the algorithm is the most valuable content on the social media site. They saw it in the terms of only economics. So how this works? First, as we know, there is a 30 or a 40-second reel or a clip. Then it is algorithmically amplified, and then there is a viral distribution like hashtags and viral share by the bots. Finally, we have the WhatsApp private group. The WhatsApp private group, they basically act as a digital villages where the admin act as the most trusted person here. So when the admin sends something, so all the WhatsApp group members, they usually have a sense of trust in him. So they do not check about whether that information which is processed by that admin is true or not, but they simply get outraged by this. So it is very much dangerous. This WhatsApp is a very dangerous. This encryption is a very dangerous thing in that sense. So talking about the global populist who authorize hates, and the case study from my home country India. As sir has pointed about here Bolsonaro, Viktor Orban from Hungary, opposes the refugee resettlement, but he reframed refugees as the toxic infiltrator. The Donald Trump in United States, he gave very anti-immigrant rhetoric from criminality accusations to something more sinister, claiming that the defendant immigrant were they are doing some soft treason, that the system itself was rigged. But what led and after that it led to the Capitol riot on the 6th of January, where the ordinary citizens they were convinced that they were saving the democracy, and attempted to overthrow an elected government through violence. So that was all digitized through the channels. Notice the pattern if we notice the pattern in all these three, we have one thing, the authorizing, they are not authorizing it, they are just saying it, and we the people are just interpreting it. The leaders are not booked for those things, but we the citizens, we the peoples, they are booked for it. Now why India? We are 1.4 billion in population with with the data as cheap as €3 per month, and and the data and the digital penetration is about each and every person has a has a smartphone, so they use it like this. So we have 1.4 billion people, cheap internet, and yes, we are WhatsApp dominated. We don't use TikTok and all that stuff. So we are mostly WhatsApp dominated, and there are lots of WhatsApp group where a lot of data is processed here and there. So in my, so in my country, how hate travels through digitization. So when we see the hate on the ground, it results in lynching. If you see, then there are, daily there are cases of lynching over there in India, only on the basis of the fact that those digital hate is, though, it is getting transformed into a real world harm. If we look at, how this, and even our, the political leaders are giving the authority. For example, yes, and I will start with the 1984 riots. I know, that was not the era of digitization, but what I want to point out is how the permission works. In 1984, the Indian former Prime Minister was gunned down by her gunmen, and later after, and later on, 2 to 3,006, that constitute about 0.9% population of India. They were murdered in the national capital of Delhi. Oh, so, after her death, her son Rajiv Gandhi took over as the Prime Minister of India. So when he addressed the crowd, so he said, when a big tree falls, the earth shakes. So what is this? These 7 or 8 words, it reframed a logical consequence that the murderers are not victims. This is the simple physics. Like, when there is an earthquake, there are some seismic things over there. So the killers were not the criminals. That's a natural response of how the people love. So right now, till now, the political, the leaders, they are using this frame, to justify each and everything. Now we have a lot of, diversity. So the term is populist leaders. So not the populist political leaders. So I am coming to how the populist leader, populist leader can be a monk. So how, these things, how the monks and all those, religious leaders, they simply, mobilize the mobs to transform it into a hate crime or something of that sort. If we are looking at these things, so the first simple thing is the religious figures, they are, what they are doing, they are isolating it on the basis of either on the basis of religion or caste. So they are just basically what they are doing, they are using the digital ecosystem to amplify those things. Like, for example, I live in a Hindu dominated, country. So, for the other minorities, those monks, they usually say that, they have a different belief, they have different civilizations. They are the existential threat to our Hindu culture and our Hindu society and to the Hindus itself. But these speeches, they do not stay in the religious gathering. When they are delivered within hours, they are, they are headlines in the news. Within minutes, they are circulating, through WhatsApp chats. They are cut it down into YouTube shorts and stripped of the context. So local mobs, what they do is they just accuse each and every person. They mob lynch them. So this is a kind of dark innovation which India has given into this world. And if I am getting more specific, then these models are nowadays very profound. This is one of the Dham Sansad model. Dham means a religious gathering. Okay. So while wrapping up, so what do we need basically? We need an act like, like the EU Digital Service Act. As we know that, it is the one of a kind act where the European Union, before learned from the mistakes from one of the German law, that's called the NetG law, which was enacted in 2017. So the DSA does not just say that remove hate speech quickly, but it asks a very deeper question. That what are the structural features of the platform that enables hate to flourish in the first place. So first is the risk assessment. So this, this EU Digital Service Act, it basically operates on very large online platform, basically with 45 million users in the in the European Union. So we are talking only about Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and Twitters. So they must conduct some regular assessment and systematic risk, which create their platform and all that stuff. So I think I must. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Sahid. And our last speaker is Francesca Cassano.
Let me start by thanking our chair for guiding this session and also my fellow panelists for their insightful contribution to this timely discussion today, and also the organizers of this really important event. My presentation today aims to critically assess how international law and bodies, more specifically the European Court of Human Rights, has responded to the rise of online hate speech and its contemporary implication. The previous intervention have highlighted very clearly how online environments amplify hateful narratives. Against this background, what I would like to question is whether the existing international regulatory framework is adequate to address these evolving digital threats, and in particular whether the European Court of Human Rights framework and its growing reliance on positive obligations enhances protections or risks producing chilling effects on the right to freedom of expression. So, to give you an overview of my presentation today, I will start with a brief outline of the existing and fragmented regulatory framework on hate speech under international law in particular, and I will focus more specifically on the European Convention on Human Rights. I will then examine the evolution of the court's jurisprudence in the absence also of an hate speech provision, as we will see later on. And finally, I will focus on how the court has addressed states' positive obligation to protect individuals and groups from online hate speech, particularly in its recent case law under Articles 8 and 14. Okay. Let me start with a brief overview on the current regulatory landscape on online hate speech and the human rights law framework. These, let's say, critical aspects are very well known, I would say, but let me say them very briefly. Because in addition to the lack of a universally accepted and also legally binding definition on hate speech at the international level, there is also no unified standards on how states should regulate it. Some calls for stricter rules to protect human dignity and social inclusion, while others fear that broad restriction may create chilling effects on free expression. As a result, also the broader human rights law framework remains fragmented, caught between competing fundamental values and rights and increasingly challenged by the evolving manifestation and amplification of hate speech in the online environment. Starting with the UN treaty system, there are particularly two important provisions that are Article 20 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Article 4 of the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination that are really relevant in the speech framework, in the human rights law framework. However, very briefly, because I want to talk more about the European Convention, neither of these provisions has been systematically applied to address the specific features and risks of online hate speech. Let's say that overall the UN framework provides an important normative basis, but it still offers limited practical guidance on how these rules apply, especially in the digital environment. Against this background, the European Court of Human Rights emerges as a very different actor. While the UN system rests on explicit treaty obligation, which prohibits certain forms of incitement to hatred, the European Convention of Human Rights contains no textual provision on hate speech. Basically no equivalent to the provision that I mentioned before. However, despite this normative vacuum, the court has expanded its case law on hate speech significantly over the past 2 decades. The court has basically used its, let's say, living instrument doctrine to address this regulatory gap, interpreting the right to freedom of expression, and actually not only in light of today's social realities and evolving arms of online hate speech. In doing so, the court has contributed to shaping a substantive approach to hate speech in the absence of textual guidance. And the court has also deliberately avoided adopting an exhaustive definition of hate speech, preferring a case-by-case approach that, of course, allows flexibility. Yet this very flexibility, while essential for addressing hate speech cases, has also attracted criticism for generating uncertainty, particularly where restriction may lead to criminal sanctions. Let me now turn to the second part of my presentation, where I examine in concrete how the European Court has progressively developed its hate speech case law, despite the absence of a specific provision in the Convention. Traditionally, the Court dealt with hate speech almost exclusively through the application of Article 10, Paragraph 2, which limits the right to freedom of expression, and Article 17, that is the Convention's anti-abuse clause. These provisions were invoked primarily in cases where the applicant claimed that national authorities had violated their freedom of expression by sanctioning their speech as hate speech. In other words, the court was largely focused on assessing whether states had breached a negative obligation to not interfere unlawfully with the right to freedom of expression. Unfortunately, today I don't have the time to fully address this strand of case law because I would like to focus more on a recent case law where the court basically examined hate speech from the perspective of the victim, relying in particular on the application of Articles 8, that is the right to private life, and Article 14, that is the right of non-discrimination within the European Convention. And the court in these cases determines whether states have discharged their positive obligation to protect individuals and vulnerable groups from hate speech. This shift matters for 2 main reasons. First, it shows a growing recognition that hate speech, especially online, can seriously damage a person's dignity, psychological well-being, and identity. Moreover, this evolving jurisprudence has also been particularly relevant in where online hate is often weaponized to delegitimize institutions, target minorities, intimidate activists, and thereby fueling digital polarization. These dynamics heightened the need for effective state protection. In this sense, the shift towards Article 8 and 14 is, in my opinion, a very important tool and a response to the realities of online hate, where traditional ideas about harm and state responsibility can no longer hold. Finally, I will now concentrate on 2 recent judgments delivered this year by the court that are Minezin and others versus Armenia and Ilareva and others versus Bulgaria, both of which concern hate speech disseminated online and in which the court identifies actions that states have failed to take to effectively fulfill their positive obligation. These cases illustrate also very well how online hate is often rooted in polarized debates, where minority groups and also activists become targets of populist and extremist ideas. As a preliminary point, it is important to recall why the court usually examines these cases under Article 8. According to the court, the dehumanization of a group can affect the group's sense of identity and self-worth and the psychological integrity of its members overall. And in such circumstances, the expression interferes with the private life within the meaning of Article 8. Let's just specify that Article 8 both conveys negative and also positive obligation to the states as addressed by the court in its jurisprudence. Later on, another relevant aspects emerging from this judgment concern the court's approach to the so-called discrimination or hate speech by association. In both cases, the applicants were not directly members of historically marginalized groups, because rather they were targeted because of their association with those groups, so through their activism and human rights work. So, in other words, both cases confirm a new trend, the fact that the court now extends protection not only to members of vulnerable groups, but also to individuals who are targeted by association to those groups. This recognition of hate speech is significant, especially in the online environment, where activists, allies, and human rights defenders in general are frequently subjected to coordinated harassment campaigns. Moreover, according to these cases, the state's duties to protect individuals from hate speech concern not only the existence of an effective legal framework capable of safeguarding individuals and groups' private life, but also their obligation, where necessary, of course, to conduct effective investigation. I will focus specifically on this latest duty because with respect to the duty to conduct effective investigation, the court specify important aspects, especially with regard the online environment. So overall, where there is evidence that the alleged statement were motivated by or at the effect of discrimination, the assessment of an investigation effectiveness goes beyond the traditional requirements of due diligence and impartiality, demanding also that states meet a higher standard in responding to the alleged bias-motivated incidents. And this is clearly illustrated in the case versus Bulgaria concerning Facebook posts containing death threats and racially motivated insults against refugee rights activists. The court in particular criticized the authorities for failing to pursue effective investigation, specifically in the online environment, such as requesting traffic data linked to the relevant IP address, just to mention one. The court held that such omission resulted in the impunity for the perpetrators and left the applicants unprotected, thereby encouraging the continuation and also the escalation of similar online attacks that, in that specific case, resulted also in the assault of one of the activists, thus highlighting, unfortunately, very well the offline consequence of online hate. In conclusion, these cases are not the only example of the court's engagement with states' positive obligation under Article 8 and 14, because I think that the first one that the court addressed under this article were in 2012, 2012, but they clearly illustrate this emerging approach. While the expansion of positive obligation raises legitimate concern, particularly about the overregulation aspects and potential chilling effects on the right to freedom of expression, I would say that the court has so far seemed to have maintained a proportionate balance. At the same time, the growing relevance of online communication underscores the need for clearer and more predictable standards, more explicit guidance on the threshold that trigger state responsibility, for example, and also the level of seriousness required to bring online expression under Article 8 and 14 may be appropriate and would significantly enhance legal clarity. Overall, the court's recent jurisprudence shows that positive obligation can be a vital tool in addressing the unique harm of online hate speech. Yet this must go with a broader reflection on also the role of and the responsibility of online platforms. And an area that is still very underdeveloped at the international law level, but increasingly essential to ensuring meaningful and sustainable protection. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Cassano. I think now I can open the floor for questions and answers. Anybody? Okay, yes.
Thank you. Thank you for all your presentation. Gonal Beauvois from University of Helsinki. And I have a question for Professor Bale, if I pronounce your name correctly. So your project looks really, really interesting, and I'm really excited to see the upcoming result. And I had a specific question for you. So as we know, there's been a great deal of discussion lately in academia, but also academia, about how to categorize seemingly non-ideological violent extremism. So you know that very well. And I'm keen to hear your views on the conceptualization of nihilistic violent extremism that you mentioned briefly in your presentation. So do you think it is useful? Is it something that you might want to develop, or do you have some reservation about this conceptualization? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a very important question because there's a very big debate, I think, in quite a few countries about how to categorize these offenses. I have a very, very strong reservation against expanding the terrorist legislation as they're currently trying to do in the UK, despite a range of comments by the independent reviewer of terrorist legislation, for example, and also the Prevent inquiry after the Southport attack. I think there are extremely rare cases where nihilistic violence is actually part of an ideology. I think these are very rare and could be recognized in court as an instance of an ideology, of an extremist ideology. But I think it's the wrong path to continue expanding the terrorism legislation as we have done for the past 20 years towards what is to me an oxymoron, which is non-ideological extremism, to take the expression that was used in the UK. Yeah, so strongly encouraging people who have a say in this debate to resist this, which is a state temptation to expand the remit of the terrorism legislation, and we have seen this temptation to grow, but I think this is kind of the pinnacle of that. Yeah, for what it's worth.
Yes?
I have a question for Professor Bale also. You explained that you identified core members that download videos and are active between the two websites, the Gore websites. Did you manage to locate these users, or at least from which country they connect to these websites? Thank you.
Very quickly, we're starting the analysis, so we haven't delved into that aspect. I believe we can have very strong clues if we dig into the data as to where they are and possibly who they are. But that's the same for, the majority of extremist forums. If you really dig into the data, you can have a pretty good understanding of who the hyper posters or the super posters indeed are. Yes.
Yep. Anybody else?
Thank you for your presentation. Firstly, my question goes to our third speaker, I guess, Sahra, sorry if I pronounced wrongly. We mostly associate the populism or the populist discourse with the far right, but what do you think about the populism for the left-wing populism? Nowadays the New York City mayor is elected, Zoran Mamdani. He also uses the kind of a left-wing populism. Do you think, is it inevitable to be a populist in this post-truth world? I just wonder what you think about also left-wing populism.
So basically the populism is, it's not about right and left. It's all about the ideological difference, how we can mobilize the thing. So as you pointed out about the New York mayor, so the New York mayor, what he did, actually he pointed out certain things where he, actually, as he has mobilized those things in a way that the people came and voted for him, in that way. So the populism can be used in multiple way. So populism can be used for voting also. Populism can be used to transform hate also. So populism can be used in multiple way. So whether it is left populism or right populism. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Hi, this is for Francesca. So I'm interested in the this development of a positive obligation to criminalize and also effectively investigate hate speech. I'm going to have to read those two 2025 cases clearly. But I'm curious as to how far this obligation goes and whether particularly reading Article 8 with Article 14 could lead to problems for states which make particular choices about what kinds of groups to protect. So in England and Wales, for example, hate speech laws cover race, obviously, religious belief and sexual orientation, but don't cover disability, gender identity or sex. And Scotland has passed different hate crime legislation that, amongst other things, does cover gender identity but doesn't cover sex, doesn't cover which a number of women's groups are exercised about. So there are always choices made, and sometimes extending hate speech laws, for example, to cover religious belief brings in different kinds of considerations about freedom of expression than those which cover race. So even if there is coverage of the same, even if groups are covered, the laws themselves may give greater or less protection in recognition of different variations of free speech concerns. So I wonder, is there a potential problem for states in making these kinds of choices? Because someone could presumably claim, if they were from a group that wasn't protected by hate speech laws in a given country, that their Article 8 rights, read with Article 14, are being violated by that state choice. So is there a potential for kind of states in the Council of Europe to be required to sort of extend their hate speech laws further than they have to avoid discriminating against certain groups who are currently not covered?
Thank you very much for your question. I will try to answer. I will start specifying that as you already know probably, the identification of the groups targeted at the international level, I think that is one of the main problems in hate speech regulation. And I think that right now hasn't been really fully addressed at the international level. I would say that probably the approach adopted by the European Court of Human Rights by applying Article 8 and 14 is one of the most comprehensive. I mean, I think that the flexibility of the court in this sense is a very important tool in order to protect groups that, for example, Article 20 and Article 4 that I've mentioned before doesn't mention sex or gender sexual orientation. So I would say that in this sense, the court's flexibility and in applying Article 8 and 14 is really important to extend this protection. I honestly don't have a really an answer yet on how and how much this protection should extend, in the sense that it's I also about the hate speech by association that I've mentioned before, the fact that now the courts protects also groups that are targeted because of their association with marginalized groups. I also see someone that critiques this court's approach because it's by extending the hate speech protection induce states to over-regulating hate speech. So this is certainly an issue. But what I would say also that at least so far the court seems to have really well managed, at least in applying Article 8 and 14, because the other way around, there are other problems in that. But when applying Article 8 and 14, the court seems to have really balanced well the protection on one side and the right to freedom of expression on the other. So I don't know if this really fully addressed your question, but yeah, I just wanted to say that I think that the court's approach is really interesting and now is an important tool to protect not only the traditional groups targeted to be protected, but also others, such as the one that I've mentioned before.
Hi, and thank you for the great presentations. My question is for Professor Stefan, and it's regards to, I'm rather looking for recommendations from you rather than other way around, that how do you deal with such a heavy content as an academic? And what are like some of the practices that you apply just to simply deal and analyze this type of content? Do you often find yourself as in a space where you have to step back and take some time off? Just a general question about that.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's an important question. It's one that is, I think, that was largely ignored in the past, but there's a lot of discussion and forums that are very helpful. That have been published in the past few years that deal with that specific question. So people who do the same kind of work that I do have been sharing best practices and tips on how to include these considerations into research design. If you need some indications, I can share some of this content. As for this project, we don't actually analyze the content of the videos, so we're not watching the videos in this project. That was one of the decisions that was made. We focus on a different aspect, which is more using the metadata and the text content rather than the video content. Of course, we see images because you have a screenshot of each video on the platforms, but we spend as little time as possible on the platforms themselves, and we rather use the data that we collect from the platforms. That was a choice because we didn't want to watch the videos. Of course, we need to watch a few of them, but we choose for that project not to be involved with that. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much, all of you. I also have a quick question for Stefan Bal. Purely out of interest, I presume that these websites are websites that we can access, you and me, right? But I can also presume that on the darker web or the deep web, there's also these kind of Gore contents. Is that something that you can also methodologically do? Can you scrape from the dark or the deep web? And is that something that you will also look into? You were talking to us about these 30 other websites. Are those then websites also from there? Thank you.
Yes. No, for this project, we only consider what's on the general web. We believe there's no strong case to include what's in the dark web because there's such a large amount of content on the clean web, not that clean, but readily accessible web. And also this is where the vast majority of the flow of Gore videos leave to social media. So for example, to Telegram channels or to WhatsApp channels, and that end up on the phones of people. And so we believe there's no need to get to these platforms. Some of them have a mirror in the dark web, so a mirror website. So you have the clean web, and then you have the dark web mirror. Typically, when they're taken down, they have like a mirror website on the dark web. It's certainly doable to scrape the dark web. We have already done it for another project, but we don't think there's a need here to do that.
I have a question for the first speaker, Ibrahim Kurt, if I pronounce your name correct, I'm sorry. You mentioned something about transparency, and I was wondering to what extent can transparency help in tackling digital populism, and not with regards to organizations that can use information, but really with regards to people who get transparency information about content moderation and algorithms, how it can help them in tackling their own biases, but also distrust that they have towards platforms and government.
Hard question. It's not easy to answer. Transparency. I think it's about regime and system. I think because, for example, we are in this hall sitting together. And there is a torturing process here for the speakers. But you cannot understand that. There is an authority here, and it's like this. You have to come here, speakers will sit here, and you are going to sit there for listeners. And for us, it's hard to see those slides, but you can see them. So we are going to obey these rules here. Is there a transparency for us? I don't think so. But when we are going to have a common sense that it's easy, it's not easy to sit here and have a good information or contact with the listeners, then we can say that we don't use that door, but that use just this door, and let's make it transparent for all individual here. So yeah, it's something like that. It's like if you have less awareness of the things in the system, in the country, in political things, then those political things give their attention to that rhetoric sentences, and it's not easy to get that transparency. But if we are going to use those, what we say with our friends, colleagues, that with education and with technological things and with the other people in society, we share the things that we are going to have common things. That at that time, I think we can get the transparency. But yeah, it's not easy like this salon, I think. Thank you for the question, but I don't know that your answer or not. Okay, thank you.
1 minute for a question and
Thank
answer.
you. This will be a quick one. This is for Stefan Bale. I wanted to ask to what extent you can, you showed us cross-platform movements between these Gore very fringe platforms, but can you also answer the question how people end up in these platforms and whether that might be connected to any more mainstream digital platforms?
Yeah, so the question is how people end up on these platforms.
You can answer that with your data.
We can answer part of that, but certainly not everything. There are many links to these platforms a little bit everywhere, to be honest. Links that lead to these platforms in extremist platforms, that you find in extremist ecosystems. I think it's only a minority of these multiple links that go to these platforms. These are the ones we're interested in to see if people actually end up in these platforms from the position of participating into an extremist online space. And we see a big difference between different extremist online spaces in the amount of outlinks towards Gore websites. As you have seen in incel platforms, you have a lot. Intriguingly, some of them have almost none. Some incel platforms have almost no link to Gore website, but some of them have a lot of links and very frequent links. Now, we don't investigate all the other links, but these websites are easily found from other discussions on other boards, on Reddit, or on web searches. Now, an interesting feature that we already see is that when you go, and this is in line with a lot of observations that we've done on similar processes, but it's interesting to note that the majority of these links in extremist online spaces towards Gore platforms are made by a minority of individuals. So it's not just in the discussion, some people dropping, have you seen this, right? I mean, this happens, but the vast majority of them are people who insist on trying to bring other people to these platforms, right? And so again, here we have some kind of parallel distribution, like how many links do people post? And so again, it's a minority issue. So it's interesting to unveil these mechanisms. If you want to tackle these individuals or to address the problem, you have to know that these are kind of minority issues, but that have very big consequences. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for being here, and I'd like to thank the organizers, of course, of this conference. I'd like to thank our speakers here as well for their insights.